When you're talking, it can hear you too. So if we were to talk back and forth,
Okay.
it would hear both of us.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. So now you're ready. Now you can shoot whatever
And
you want
how
to.
do I turn this? I want to see my face here. Can I?
If you want to put it on yourself,
Yeah.
just turn it around and face, because this right here, whatever it's facing at, is what it's going to be recording.
Okay, awesome.
And then you can flip that screen around. So if you're talking and recording yourself, now you can watch it.
I love this.
And there you go.
Hi, this is Minnie.
In the summer of 2008, the Trent Lott Leadership Institute sent 18 graduate students equipped with HD cameras to explore 3 continents in just 5 weeks to learn about race, religion, and reconciliation. Out of 170 hours of footage, this is a snapshot of their journey. The students all met for the first time in DC.
The Independence Day means a lot to the American people because there is just so much happening today. All the museums are full everywhere. It's just full.
I was really excited about the whole idea of having the cameras. I know some people haven't been as much. They kind of see it as a burden, but I like it. And I even actually like doing the video diaries, although it is kind of weird to hold a camera and, you know, like try not to look at yourself and everything. But I think the video diaries will be really worth their weight in gold.
I was terrified because you feel so self-conscious, and I didn't want to speak because I just thought the way I sound, I'm going to sound all stiff and silly, and I'm going to say silly things that's going to be on record.
It wasn't that bad. It was a little awkward at first just to get used to speaking on the camera, but after about 2 minutes, it was like your old friend.
You kind of get a bit self-conscious, and it has a bit of, I feel a bit arrogant too. Trying to talk some sense into this camera, it feels a bit self-righteous.
I always hate it. I don't like being in front of the camera. I'm a shy person by nature, and I don't really like talking all that much, but I don't know, maybe it's not that bad.
Well, I felt it was a little bit like the real world confessional, except I didn't get to go into a fun little room and spill my guts.
But the cameras kept rolling.
We wanted to look at 3 societies that had undergone traumatic historical experiences. We wanted to study the effects of racial segregation in the South, but compare those to 2 other societies that had undergone similarly traumatic histories: Northern Ireland with its troubles between Catholics and Protestants, and compare those 2 places with South Africa and its experience of apartheid and what's happened since the end of apartheid.
You're dealing with such abstract theoretical concepts like race, religion, and reconciliation. All those things are such loaded terms and theoretical and abstract that they're not grounded in the 5 senses. They're not grounded in the earth and the world and the human body, so on and so forth. But when you hear these stories, you can put faces with race, and then I can give a name or something of someone of a different race. You learn so much more because you can have an empathetic response.
Reconciliation, I feel, is something intangible. It's really, really difficult to explain. It's about having no malice on the inside.
Even if you're different, coming together for a common purpose, even though we've got different mentalities, different thoughts, different backgrounds. Just having that, that respect and love for each other, regardless of what so-and-so believes. And I think that's what reconciliation is about. It doesn't mean that you can agree with every single thing that Tom, Dick, and Harry says, but as long as there's that mutual understanding as a basis, I think anything is possible. We can live in peace and harmony. I mean, you don't have to kill each other for it.
I think it's a process, and there's a process of reconciliation that needs to you go through, So it's never something you reach, like, oh, here it is. Yeah, shiny and beautiful. Be nice, though.
Everybody brought something different to the table. Everybody impacted me. Good Aunts was my roommate, and Good Aunts has had a rough life and was a Rwandan refugee, moved to Sweden in '94 to escape the genocide. And man, is she a pistol because she's been through so much. But I mean, it made me appreciate her that much more to understand where she was coming from.
Rebecca, morning guys. Cheese.
I left Rwanda at the time of war. It's 13 years now. It's difficult, it's always difficult to leave whatever you had and have to start on afresh. It's like having your whole life ripped off and you are forced to start a new one.
What is a Piggly Wiggly? Please explain. This is beautiful.
Happy. I'm sitting in BB King's Club, watching blues, drinking good beer, and just generally enjoying myself with people I now consider my friends. Sad. Standing in the building from which Martin Luther King was shot. Actually looking down on the view that was seen. That made me infinitely sad.
It's really sad to know that there was there were people in that bus, and the people who torched that bus, they had no regard for those people. They weren't seen as human beings. I almost feel like they were treated like animals.
It's one of those things you don't feel too proud about where you come from when you see these people look at exhibits and say, "Wow, your ancestors did this to these people."
When I was bringing a group through, there was a little girl who was like kindergarten or first grade, and it was a group of all black students and black teachers, and we had gone through and we were at the end, and you're looking down on the rest of the museum, and we see this group coming through, and she goes, "Oh, I wish I were them," and I was like, "Oh, so you could go through the museum again?" And she said, "No, I wish I were white." And so that's just like, I mean, it's like you have the air knocked out of you kind of, and it makes you so sad. And then I'm just looking around and struggling and going, okay, I'm the only white person here. Like, what can I say? Like, you just are at a loss and going, maybe a teacher overheard this and will say something, but they didn't, of course. So I was just like, well, why? You're beautiful just the way you are.
Sometimes in that museum when we were walking around, there was kind of an atmosphere which was quite tense at times, and I think that just seeing things for people, it renews their emotions, and they realize again how traumatic things were and still are sometimes, because pain just lives on. It can live on in generations.
One kid asked me one time, why was there slavery? And you just go, wow, that's a loaded question.
think that's what was great about this trip, is that not only did we get to go to these places, we were with people the whole time who live there and who are from there and who know the history. It gives you another taste of the culture too, because you can come in with a stereotype or belief, and you can see things in that place when you travel there that either confirm that stereotype or disconfirm it.
It has been a really great experience meeting people from South Africa and people from America. I really love that bit. I actually love the fact that we actually share the rooms together just to socialize more and to know about each other. And at the end of the day, just to learn that we're all similar, although with a little bit of differences. But that doesn't make that even makes the relationship even richer.
Obviously our group is such an internationally diverse group, and we had perspective from Uganda and Rwanda and Tunisia and England. I can't readily distinguish somebody as an American, an Irish person and South African. I found more friends in the cross-cultural context than I did in my own group. I've got more commonalities with some of the American and Irish students than I would necessarily have with the group of students that come from South Africa.
While traveling to Ole Miss, they continued the conversation about the South's heavy past, helping the international students see where the Mississippi students were coming from.
Welcome to good southern July weather. Thank goodness for a little bit of shade.
You have to look at the dynamic of the group, even within our group. So you look for people who are similar to you and you identify with, and then, you stick around with them and you look for someone who is different, and you basically starts to, focus on the difference between you and, widening the gap. And that happens in every context.
While they are starting to find common ground, they also find a communication breakdown.
Like I was telling Derek something just today, and he didn't understand until I had to pronounce it in the American way.
Yes!
Water!
My friend was on the plane and she asked for water. And they said, what? And they kept saying, what? And they said, water. And they said, oh, water, oh. It's difficult to understand each other sometimes. But I never expected it to be as amazing as it was. I feel like there's a bit of a barrier between me and the other Americans I'm speaking to from the US, because although they speak the same language, it's a different accent, first of all. You have to kind of tune your ear. It's also different facial expressions, different meaning behind things. So it was quite confusing.
Communication seems to be a bit of an issue. I mean, I'll ask questions, and I think some of the other South Africans will ask questions, and it's like people don't really understand what you're asking. It's quite amazing. I don't quite expect that, because we all speak English, or American after all.
Sometimes people say something and you take it as something else because, of the difference in culture. For instance, people who come from the Mediterranean, we're highly tempered, and we have different way of expressing ourselves. We're very direct.
I got a nice feeling in my stomach when I went to Mississippi. I thought that's one of the darkest areas when it comes to race relations and segregation. Meeting somebody like William Winter, former governor, it lifted one of my stereotypes. I had a stereotype towards the older white people in the South, and he was such an honest guy. He was a real person, and he had so much empathy, and he put so much on the line. I couldn't help but love the man.
Mississippi and South Africa have so much in common, so much in common. We had a colonial society here for many years, just as you had in South Africa. And the racial apartheid that existed in South Africa compared with the racial segregation that existed here in this state, accompanied by violence, accompanied by incredible examples of discrimination and oppression.
I couldn't stop crying. I was crying when Governor Winter was speaking. But I was so touched by him and his being, 85, and his humility and his simplicity, actually. And Judge Wingate was very charming.
I grew up less than 3 miles from here. I grew up in an area that's called the North End. It was a rough area when I grew up. It's still a rough area. But when I grew up, it was an especially rough area. And of course, it was segregation. So then there were houses and districts reserved for blacks and houses in the areas reserved for whites. And if we were on the wrong side of town at nightfall and approached by police, then that could pose a problem. It was an apartheid-like condition. My dog had gotten up a little earlier than I did and had made the trek around to my grandmother's house on the next street. Never made it because the police had decided to make him target practice. So then when I went around and saw my dog there, my beloved dog, and I was somewhere around 8 years old, I was crushed at the death of my dog. Crushed that his life would have been taken just because a police officer wanted to have target practice. Shooting in an occupied neighborhood just for target practice. That should give you some flavor of where I grew up, and also some flavor of what segregation meant, and also some idea of what it meant to have this badge of difference of being black, colored, Negro, as the term was then.
We speak now of terrorism in this country as if it began with the events of September the 11th, 2001. Well, let me tell you, in that dark period, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, here in Mississippi and in many other places in the Deep South, there was a terror in our midst that was so as real and as grim, as deadly as any to be found anywhere today. The Ku Klux Klan was an organization fanatically devoted to maintaining segregation of the races. Members of the Klan compared themselves to Arab leaders and were so fanatically and religiously committed to their cause that they believed that their ends justified their deadly means.
When the 3 civil rights workers were killed in Mississippi, and there was this massive manhunt for them, the racist press in Mississippi sought to quell that whole episode. And headlines in the Clarion Ledger was that this was all a plot by these 3 civil rights workers who are pretending to be missing just to bring embarrassment to the state of Mississippi. And of course, later on, those 3 civil rights workers were found, and of course, they had been murdered. But this was all part of segregated Mississippi.
Dr. King estimated that during the period from 1964 to 1968, well over 100 churches were attacked in Mississippi. There were so many that not even the FBI could keep an accurate account. I have a particular remembrance of that particular time. Just weeks before the bombing of the temple, the Jewish temple here in the fall of 1967. I had been defeated for governor after a bitter racist campaign. I was subjected to threats on my life to the extent that in the closing days of the campaign, my wife Elise and I were obliged to travel only with the protection of plainclothes state troopers. One particularly chilling message, which was recorded by my campaign manager, said that even if I should be elected, I would not live to serve.